mean, there is one is to really recognize that we need to work in this agenda. I know that it doesn't sound like a big issue, but everything starts with the recognition that we have a problem, that this problem needs to be addressed with this whole of a government and whole of society approach, that we need to work with the different ministries, that we need to work with the local governments. And there are like different areas. One is to have transport-oriented development as one of the policies that need to be implemented at the local level. And we've been doing and supporting different municipalities so they can adopt this approach. We've been also creating a unit within the Ministry of Transport under the name of Sustainable Mobility. So this new structure now is developing new policies and in the transport sector and for mobility issues. It's also generating new infrastructure for bikes, bike lanes, you say, bike lanes, right? We've been also, yeah, we've been also, we launched one law with incentives for the electrification of the transport of the private fleet, and also and working with a pilot for electrification of buses. We just launched that pilot phase, and it's very interesting to see the reaction of the citizens when they use these units. You know, the way this technology works, where you don't have any sounds, where it's so new, and you just see the people that it is using the buses right now, and they are so happy, and you know, that they realize that they can be in a comfortable unit, in a comfortable bus with no sound, with no pollution, and you see that they want to have more of this quality in the public transport sector.
Sure.
And this is a little bit the things that we've been working on. And I think that the other good element, I mean, and we're still, there's a big challenges. There's still a lot of transformation that needs to be done, but working a lot to consolidate and to implement an electric train that will connect the main cities within the metropolitan area, and this is also, you know, working a lot. We even managed to submit a project to the Green Climate Fund, so we can, you know, move forward with this with the implementation of this project of the train. And I will say that the other achievement is to have a more organized civil society. A lot of NGOs that are demanding, you know, this enhancement, and that are demanding to have a better public transport system and to have more infrastructure for sustainable mobility, for bikes, even for walking, because if you come to San Jose, you will realize that our sidewalks are not so friendly. And we still need to do a lot of investments in these areas, but we've been also changing the laws and some policies. So now the municipalities, the local governments can invest in these sidewalks. I mean, there have been what I call these small changes, but I think that will be very important for the transformation of our cities.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking a lot now, I think, about some of the policies that were laid out in Costa Rica's national decarbonization plan, right? This is all part of the work really associated with that plan. And in the TDA, we've been really trying to promote the national decarbonization plan of Costa Rica because it's a huge achievement for one of our members. And you've already been explaining, I think, some of the elements of the transport piece or portion of that decarbonization plan. But I'm a bit curious because, in the TDA, we're talking always about breaking down silos. Has it been a challenge, or have you been able to work well with, for example, the Ministry of Transport or local operators in cities? How has it been in kind of working across sectors or working with different groups? Because I know you come from the Ministry of the Environment. Maybe the Ministry of Transport wasn't as perceptive or as welcoming of the policies you were putting forward. How has that relationship, how has that work been? Can Costa Rica teach the rest of the world something about how you went about doing this work?
Well, Costa Rica needs to learn from other countries, absolutely. And I think that it is more
countries have a lot to learn from Costa Rica, trust me.
It is more with this attitude that we are seeing that it is possible to have a different city, and as you mentioned, we know that we have our protected areas that we've been doing a good job in what we call the green agenda. Mm-hmm. But we understand and we acknowledge that we need to improve the way we are working in our cities. And this includes the way we are working with the transport sector. And yes, when we launched the decarbonization plan, which is our long-term strategy, that demand and this interaction with the transport sector, not only with the ministry, but also with the other stakeholders of the transport sector. And it was a very good dialogues. We established these dialogues, and there was a lot of discussions around the concrete milestones and the concrete indicators that we just put in the decarbonization plan. It was a huge discussion with all these different stakeholders, but there was a lot of clarity that it is something that we need, and that it is something that it is possible, because now that everything is changing so fast, and we know that now it is possible to talk about the electrification of the transport fleet, especially with the light vehicle fleet, that it is also possible to talk about and define a strategy, with short and middle and long-term goals for the electrification of the light vehicle fleet as well. For freight transportation, we know that it is a little bit harder, but then everything it's around this discussion of the train and also hydrogen and other technologies. And this, made us work with these different stakeholders. This conversation for us, it was talking about the reduction of emissions, of carbon emissions, but for them, it was more to talk about improving the whole transport system. So this element of co-benefits has been also in the heart of these interactions and in the way we have managed to work with the other ministries. One way or the other, this is an agenda that can mobilize some resources for pilot projects, for innovation, for capacity building and mobilization of technology. And the other ministries see us, as a way then to do a modernization of their sector one way or the other. And this has been a very interesting journey. We've been lately also working with the Ministry of Housing. They are the ones in charge of land use planning here in the country. And we just launched a new, we are calling it Agenda Urbano Ambiental, Environmental Urban Agenda. And also, working with the two ministries, defining the priorities and specific projects where we will be working together, the two ministries. And we have been, of course, mobilities there. And these different approaches with the local governments is there. And this is, I will say, one of the lessons learned from the yeah, from the decarbonization plan, even from the moment that we made it and now during the implementation phase.
I mean, decarbonization is not just about removing carbon from the air, right? You know, it's also about equity, inclusion, just transition. You know, we don't just do this because we want to, you know, save the planet, because you're not going to save the planet without protecting people, you know, improving cities. It all goes hand in hand. And I don't know, it seems as if the culture of Pura Vida allowed this work to maybe be a little less challenging than maybe in other countries, other cities, because what you're describing is super interesting. And I think that culture, as we said before, the world has a lot to learn from the culture of Costa Rica for sure. I want to ask a little bit of a different question now about the TDA. And as we mentioned earlier in our chat, Costa Rica is one of the founding members of the TDA. And while you were in charge, or the director of the climate change desk, I think it was the name of it, back a few years ago now, before you became the minister, I mean, you were one of the key people in helping to build and you know, promote the TDA throughout a number of events and the work that we're doing around the UNFCCC process. But as you know, the TDA's unique approach is really about countries, cities, regions, and companies working together. That's what makes the alliance special, in a sense. I have a question about that.
I remember that it was like 5 Cs, right? That it was, I used to hear, it was Marucha or somebody talking about the 5 Cs approach, which I think it is a great concept, right? Like citizens, cities,
right,
companies, countries, and
we started, I think it was a time where we were trying to add the citizen part of it, which I think is super important, because you need the buy-in of the people to really make it work. But what do you think is the potential of the TDA then? And what benefits can countries like Costa Rica derive from membership in the TDA, right? What are the lessons that can be learned by this unique 3C approach or 4C approach, or however many Cs we want to talk about? Because certainly there are lots of stakeholders that have to be engaged in this work towards transport transformation.
We're talking about a transformational change that needs to happen at different levels, right? Local, national, international. And we need a lot of collaboration, because there are a lot of new things. We don't have the answers for everything, and we need to be learning. This is a learning by doing process. We need to move so fast. This is what we are calling the decisive decade. Everything, we need to accelerate the way we're doing climate action and implementation of this transformational change. And I truly believe that it is through partnerships that we can catalyze all this collaboration. There are a lot of resources out there, economic, but also human talent, knowledge, and it is through partnerships that we can facilitate this knowledge sharing, these learning from each other, just the possibility of sharing, you know, the difficult parts, the challenges. It is so important, because sometimes when you say, yes, in Costa Rica, this culture, but we're still facing a lot of challenges and a lot of pushbacks from different sectors, as particularly now with the COVID crisis. And people really want to see a quick economic recovery. People want to see, you know, things happening very fast. And this transformation sometimes takes time to see the benefits. And you know, when you are facing these pushbacks and you are there in your room, sometimes you're saying, am I doing the right thing? And just to learn to be seated with other companies, governments, citizens, NGOs discussing, and then you realize that we're all facing common challenges sometimes, yes, in different countries, in different cities, but at the end are very similar in certain ways. So this possibility of having a platform where you can be doing this exchange of knowledge, it's a great. And then yes, I come from the climate community one way or the other. That's how I see myself. But then you need to bring these other people from the transport ministry and to be engaged and in this, with this narrative, with these visions, with all these elements. And I think that the TDA also is a space where you can be, connecting people from the transport sector with the people from the climate change community, and they can be learning from each other. And I think that it is one of the benefits that we just received, some from the TDA, some of the inputs that we had for the creation of this sustainable mobility unit within our Ministry of Transport came from the experiences of these workshops and activities that were implemented within some TDA. I don't remember. There was 1 week or one gathering from the TDA members, and I remember that it was that we managed to include one of one critical person from the Ministry of Transport, and that opened a lot of doors. And it's a little bit, I think, what the kind of support that we need sometimes from these kind of platforms.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this kind of collaboration of key stakeholders can really ensure that, like you were saying, the transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it's certainly not going to happen without everybody in some sense engaged and involved. And to hear that, this sustainable mobility unit came out of kind of TDA collaboration is great to hear, because that's exactly what we are trying to accomplish in bringing together these different stakeholders, these different Cs, let's say. I just want to ask one more question, and this one is going to be a bit of maybe a fun one. So this national decarbonization plan is your long-term strategy as according to the Paris Agreement. So the question is then, if we're looking towards 2050, what will Costa Rica look like if you actually accomplish the key elements of this transformation, of this decarbonization plan? I don't know, maybe we can take it in the context of a smaller subsector of the country, right? San Jose, for example. What would it look like? Would it be like a futuristic looking city, electric buses everywhere, where people be able to walk?
All over with electric buses, with the train, with an electric train, with more buildings. I mean, if you come to the city, you will see that we're not used to live and work in buildings. And we know that, it is so important to have a more compact cities one way or the other. So I think that it will be a more compact city with some urban parks within the city, and a lot of and a more integrated transport system. People will be able to move walking, using their bikes, using the train or the electric buses. And then there will be just fewer cars. And yes, this is a little bit and more green in the city. I have a beautiful view from there. Let me see if you can look at it. Not really.
You
more
seem
or less.
Quite.
There are a lot of constructions right now.
But it seems like you have a nice elevation to see.
I do. I'm on the 9th floor, so there is a nice view from here. And yes, I can imagine that it will be this greener city, and that it is more friendly for the people, which is at the end what we want.
Yeah,
a friendly city.
Having an inclusive city is so important, because people need to go to work and be part of the wider economy, and sometimes it's very difficult when options in terms of transport and mobility aren't there, and that makes poverty more of an issue than it should be. And I'm sure now with COVID, it's making things much more difficult.
Absolutely. And that's why I think that when you just mentioned that this just transition, and to invest in public transport is probably one of the most democratic investments that we have. And I think that is what we need.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I live in New York City and we're having all this political fun now as we try to elect a new mayor. And there isn't that much talk about public transport. And I was a little bit sad and disheartened. There's a lot of talk about law and order and jobs and all these things, but I mean, a lot of the needs of the city really requires this look at infrastructure. And sometimes, that doesn't get the same attention because, like you were saying before, it's a slower progress. And people sometimes want solutions right away. And, maybe looking to the future and expecting less right away and more tomorrow could help
Yes.
change a bit of their understanding of what actually could help make their city better. So, Andrea, it's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Chris. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, and I'm sure all of the TDA members and our partners will enjoy watching this interview and fireside chat. So thank you very much. Once again, we have with us Her Excellency, Andrea Meza Murillo, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.